Hey there, my name is Josh Hall, and I'm a former member of Faithful Word Baptist Church in Tempe, Arizona, under the man Stephen L. Anderson, who I once called pastor. I'm making this video to explain why I left Faithful Word, and I also want to clear up some lies that have been told about the men that left FWBC before me, namely Tyler Baker, Elliot Ray, Rick Martinez, and Russell Bopps. And the specific lie that I want to focus on is the claim that they went around the church trying to secretly subvert members into oneness Pentecostalism in an attempt to draw away disciples after themselves. And anyone who's familiar with the situation will know what I'm talking about. But before I get into the details of that situation, let me tell you how I ended up at Faithful Word and then how all these events played out. So, like many others, I first heard of Stephen Anderson through YouTube, being particularly impacted by After the Tribulation. After listening to Stephen Anderson for about 9 months, I decided to move my family from Tennessee to Arizona in October of 2014 so that we could be part of a great soul-winning church to serve God in what I believe are the last days. And so we love Faithful Word. We were actively involved in the soul-winning program there, and many people can attest to that I was at a lot of soul-winning events, a lot of soul-winning marathons. So we were involved. We weren't just fringe, members of Faithful Word. We were there, and we were serious about, what the church's mission was. And so everything was great for a couple of years, and then in June of 2017, the whole Tyler Baker controversy happened, where Brother Baker, the deacon, the first deacon ever, and so far the only deacon of Faithful Word Baptist Church, was fired. And then, contrary to the claims that came out of Faithful Word, he was strongly encouraged to leave. He was not thrown out. And along with Brother Elliot Ray, Rick Martinez, and Russell Bopps, who all left shortly after that. So, at first, I believed the official story, that these guys were teaching damnable heresies and trying to draw away people after them to go to Baptist. And, I believed it. I believed Pastor Anderson, and then I started seeing the videos that they came out. I watched their videos, the guys that they put out, and then I saw Brother Baker's, and it didn't at all portray the wicked heresy that Stephen Anderson was declaring that they believed. And so I was confused. But I still believed Stephen Anderson because he was my pastor, and I wanted to believe he was right and telling the truth. As he repeated over and over that there were oneness Pentecostals and Judases trying to split the church. So I believe, like everyone else, that Russell Bopps, who was still my best friend, was deceived. He was just deceived by these guys. He wasn't really a part of the group, and I was determined to show him the error of his ways. So I called him one night after he had left, and I had the intent of showing him from the Bible, how he was wrong and how he was going down this dark path. But then I came to realize that he didn't believe anything like Steve was accusing them of. He totally believed something different than what Stephen Anderson was accusing them of believing. And so once I realized that these guys didn't actually believe, between the videos and between, Brother Russell, I realized they didn't believe what he said they believed. And so once I realized that, I purposed in my heart to find out, well, if what he's saying about what they believe isn't true, then are these accusations about them going around like secretly trying to convert people to oneness Pentecostalism and then to get them to leave the church, were those accusations true or false? Those were really the big ones that I wanted to narrow in on, because that is obviously nefarious. So I went to talk with them, and I learned that none of them believed what Stephen Anderson said they believed. And it became very clear after they showed me a multitude of sermons where Stephen preached over the years the very same things that they said, that Stephen had changed what he believed around the time that all this happened. I mean, he didn't always believe this Orthodox Trinity, this hardcore Orthodox Trinitarian position that he believes. He used to believe something much different. And so, over the next few weeks, while I was still attending FWBC, I investigated the accusations of them subverting people. A key point was when, during a sermon, one of the sermons that he preached, I believe in his trilogy of sermons that he preached right after they left, he preached a sermon called, I don't remember exactly what the title was, but he preached a sermon where he got up and he asked, he made the claim how during this preaching class the other night, all these people raised their hands. He said there was like 30-some people at this preaching class, and how all these people raised their hands. He even like waved his arm around the room when he was preaching it. He's saying like all these people raised their hands, saying, that these guys came up to him and were talking to him in the preaching class.
These guys have been nefarious, they've been devilish, they've been diabolical. And I didn't realize, when I fired Tyler Baker, I didn't realize how bad it was. Because I just found out of it. I had no clue about this last Sunday. No clue. Did not see this coming at all. And I found out about this on Monday morning. And it wasn't until I came out and said, hey, we fired him, he's teaching heresy, he's going around teaching. And I had a list of all the people that he admitted teaching it to. But then we went to the preaching class on Tuesday night. Who was at the preaching class on Tuesday night? Put up your hands. A lot of hands, right? There were about 30 guys total over there. I did a quick little head count. There were about 30 guys on Tuesday at the preaching class. And there were a whole bunch of people standing up. Oh, yeah, he talked to me about it. Oh, yeah, he told me about it.
And there was another instance, either in this sermon or another sermon, where Steve asked for a show of hands. Like who here in this church tonight did these guys come up to and talk to? And a few guys raised their hands, and one that I specifically remember that raised their hand was Jeremy Kohler. Now, I'll get to that a little bit later, but after the sermon, Caleb Akinosho and I got into my car and drove over to Rick Martinez's house to go soul winning with those guys. On the way there, I asked him, hey, you were at that preaching class. Steven Anderson's saying that all these people raised their hands. How many people actually raised their hands? And he said, look, only 3 people raised their hands. He referred to himself. He raised his hand. And then he said that John and Jesse McPhail raised their hands. So out of 30 guys, 3 raised their hands, when Steven Anderson made it sound like it was a large majority of the people in the room. And so, out of 30 people, 3 people raised their hands. That's a big embellishment for him to say that it was all these people. And when we got to Brother Rick's house, Caleb and Brother Baker detailed how Tyler spoke with Caleb about the Godhead only after Caleb had decided he wanted to move to Jacksonville to join Valiant Baptist Church. And if Caleb has any integrity, he will own up to the fact that was when he talked to him about it. That's when it happened. He had decided he wanted to leave Faithful Word, and that's when Tyler Baker talked to him about it. It wasn't before. It wasn't like he tried to convince him to leave or anything like that. And something worth mentioning too during this whole time, is that Caleb stated multiple times over the course of those weeks that Steven Anderson had clearly changed what he believed. I mean, anybody with eyes to see would realize that he clearly changed what he believed about the Godhead. And he also noticed, like everyone else, that Steven Anderson attacked Roger Jimenez and his interpretation of the Godhead as he preached it in his sermon, The Trinity Spectrum. And in this sermon, Roger Jimenez got up and said, you know what? I have more of a problem with saying that Jesus is not the Father. I have more of a problem with saying someone saying that Jesus is not the Father than I do with somebody saying that Jesus is the Father. And this is also the sermon where he gets up and shows the little math problem where, it's the algebraic equation, where he says if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C. And he used that to explain the Godhead in a way in that if Jesus is equal to God and the Father is equal to God, therefore Jesus is the Father, something along those lines. And then Steven Anderson, a couple days later in a sermon, got up and mocked that very math problem and said, this is what one of those heretics showed me. This is the math problem they showed. And then he goes on to, give his faulty logic as to why the problem wasn't, didn't make sense and didn't apply. So, he said that this is the equation that these heretics use. So he was calling Roger Jimenez a heretic for believing that. He didn't call him out by name because, well, who knows why he didn't call Jimenez out, probably because he's friends and he's a respecter of persons. But I digress. Let's not get off on a tangent. Let's get back to the sequence of events. So Elliot Ray, me and Caleb were at Rick's house, at Rick Martinez's house. Elliot Ray also explains how he had spoken to the McPhails. He owned up to it. He said, yeah, I spoke to the McPhails about the Godhead, but not in secret. He says it was in the church van on the way back from a soul winning time back to the church. And while he was talking to the McPhails, there were other people present that overheard what he was saying. I don't know if they got involved in the conversation specifically, but they were there and they overheard what he said. And then the conversation, once they got back to church, it continued into the church building, And one of the people that was specifically mentioned as being there was Jeremy Kohler. So he overheard He raised his hand, said these guys came up and talked to me, but he was just present when the conversation happened. But the point is that when they got back to church, the conversation continued into the building. It wasn't this deceptive, hey kid, come here, pull them off to the side and try to convince them of this. No, it was open, candid conversation. They were just talking about the Bible and what they believe, like many people at FWBC do, or at least they did. I don't know how it is now, because it's probably, dangerous to talk about what you believe, unless you're deemed a heretic. That's the fear now. So, and there was also another sermon where it may have been the same sermon. Again, it's been a year, so I don't remember all the specific time, the sequence of events and all that. But after one of these sermons as well, I went up to several people and asked them, hey, did these guys talk to you about this? Do they come up to you and try to convince you of this doctrine? And it was at least a handful of people. And only two specifically that I remember were Jerry Rodriguez and Paul Wittenberger. And they both said, no, these guys never came up to me and talked to me. So, I found no one outside of Caleb, that said that these guys talked to them about their heretical false doctrine. He was the only person that I spoke to personally that said, yeah, these guys came, and talked to me about it. He's the only one that said, yeah, they talked to me about their heretical false doctrine. So the truth of the situation was turning out to be way different than what Steven Anderson was leading everyone to believe. So, and on top of that, from the beginning of the whole controversy, the thoughts really just nagged me. How I hung out with these guys a lot. Especially over like that last year before they left, they were, a tradition of theirs, if you will, was to go out to eat together after Sunday evening service. They would go to like Chipotle or some local restaurant, and they would hang out and just talk about Bible. That was what they, that's what they were wont to do. They regularly did that, and usually it started off talking about the sermon that we just heard and how, yeah, it was a great sermon, this point was good, that point was good, and then some people would be like, well, I disagree with the sermon because of this point or that point, and then, maybe they'd go back a little bit and kind of just, it would turn into like, well, what do we believe, and ultimately it always ended up being like a rabbit trail, where we would just start talking about all sorts of stuff, one doctrine or another doctrine or, whatever. I mean, it was just friends hanging out, talking about the Bible or whatever came to mind, and not once though, not once did this subject, of the Godhead come up where, they were going on and on about, any sort of oneness Pentecostalism. The subject of the Godhead never came up. All sorts of other subjects came up, and that one did not come up while I was there. So, that perplexed me. Obviously it was a matter of friends getting together and, iron sharpening iron. But of all the people that you think that they would have tried to talk to about their false doctrine, you would think they would definitely have brought it up to me. They kind of pretty much always hung out. They would occasionally invite like one or another family or whoever out to hang out with them. But they pretty much had their core group of friends that always hung out. And the invitation was always extended to me. It was never like I wasn't welcome to come. I could have came. I just couldn't afford to go out to eat, every week after church on Sundays. But you would think I would have heard this as much as I hung out with them. And yet, no, not once. They never brought it up to me. And they definitely didn't try to persuade me or coerce me into believing anything like this or any other doctrine for that matter. It was just another topic in their discussions. It wasn't really a big thing that, they went around trying to convince people of any particular. They didn't do that at all. It was just a basic conversation about the Bible like people who love the Bible tend to have, and that we still have now at Valiant because we just love talking about the Bible. So ultimately, with the corroboration of multiple testimonies and all this evidence and my own experience, it became very clear that Steve was lying about these guys. He had also clearly changed his position on the Godhead after years of preaching the same thing very consistently. I came to the undeniable truth that Steven Anderson was lying and that these guys were not what they had been accused of. Moreover, it was apparent that he lied with malicious intent. He was trying to destroy these people's lives. He didn't care about them. And so, with that knowledge, I couldn't stay at FWBC anymore. And follow a man like that who, at the drop of the hat, will just turn on his brothers like that. And I eventually ended up leaving. I took my family elsewhere, and we eventually ended up at 35th Avenue Baptist Church, which, by the way, is a great church. I have no bones saying that. It was a great church. We had a great many months there that we were there. And so after this, through the course of time, we ended up moving to Jacksonville, where we live now, and we're attending Valiant Baptist Church. So that's my story, as best as I can remember it, given that it's been over a year. And the order may not be perfect, but these things I can let you know. All that being said, I just want to summarize, that you can believe that it was a complete and utter lie. This is how I came to this conclusion, and I'll let you be the judge. Let me leave you with these few points. Point number one: not once did any of these guys try to talk with me or convince me of their view of the Godhead that Steven Anderson went on and on about. Even though I was a close friend with these guys, they never came up to me, not one time. And point number two: Caleb Akanosho had an eyewitness testimony of how many people actually testify to having been talked to about this doctrine. And that was in stark contrast to what Steve lied about and made it seem like. The few who they did speak to were proven to not be subversive or covert accounters. It wasn't this thing where they pulled them into a dark corner and tried to convince them. It was open and candid. And the few people that did raise their hand during the sermon where he asked them to raise their hands, they were confirmed to all be people that were in the van when Elliot was speaking with the McPhails. So really they just overheard the conversation. They weren't, directly talked to about it. And the only other outlier, just as a fact to bring in, is James Foster. He also raised his hand at one time or another saying these guys talked to him about it. But really it was James Foster who approached Brother Baker after he heard, he wanted to ask him about his beliefs because he heard Mrs. Baker tell his wife Katie, that Tyler was going to be baptizing in the name of Jesus. And so that sparked his interest. He went up to Brother Baker and asked him about it. That's when he told him about his beliefs on the Godhead. So point number three, I found no one else in the church claiming they had spoken to them. Steven Anderson put these accusations forth as just, fact, and everyone should just believe them without question or investigation. And yet, that's it. That's all the evidence you have. He just makes these claims that all these people believed it. And so, in the end, once it was all said and done, none of the people that were originally going to leave to join Valiant, because a bunch of people had said they were going to leave to go with Brother Baker. This was known. None of them actually ended up leaving. And all the people that did leave were planning on staying at Faithful Word all along, which, talk about irony. And one might ask, I think this is interesting to bring up, one might ask, who were the people that were going to leave to join Valiant? According to Pastor Baker, some of them were Caleb Akanosho, which we've already mentioned. Caleb Akanosho, he decided he wanted to leave on his own. And you want to know why? Because, in his opinion, Steven Anderson was an unapproachable pastor, primarily when it comes to questions about the Bible and other things. And anybody who knows anything about Steven Anderson and been close to him knows how he gets when you ask him certain questions about the Bible. And, if Caleb has any backbone, he'll man up to the fact that he was going to leave and he didn't like Steven Anderson. He was going to leave. This is how it went down, according to Pastor Baker. Caleb said that he was for sure going to leave Faithful Word, and he was either going to go to, I believe it was Steadfast in Jacksonville, or Steadfast in Dallas, or Valiant in Jacksonville. So at that point, it wouldn't matter if Brother Baker tried to persuade him to come to Valiant. He was already talking about how he was going to leave for sure, and those were his two options. So what's wrong with him trying to persuade him to come to Jacksonville? So another family that was going to move to join Valiant were the Gillilands, if you know who they are. They ended up moving back home where they were from, though, because of sick family, but they were just another family that wanted to leave and join. And another person is Charlie Jeffrey, who I believe is still at Faithful Word. He had decided on his own that he wanted to move to Jacksonville to join Valiant because he wanted to be a missionary and believed the experience would be a great learning opportunity. And another family were the Balls. John and Michelle Ball, I believe. They were pretty sure they wanted to move also. And there was another family that had recently moved there, at least recently when we were there, was Isaiah Freedom and his wife and children, I think they have. He wanted to be a part of Valiant because he thought that he'd have more of an opportunity to be involved if he went to a smaller church than Faithful Word, because it was getting pretty big at this time. And, last of all, we have the Fosters. That I know of, this is the last family, is the Fosters, who were very adamant about leaving, had made it public they were going to leave, until right at the end when they changed their mind. So, and, why am I listing off all these people? What does this even matter? Well, I think it matters, these people, because I think it's a good segue into why I think Steven Anderson did all of this. Because that's the question that I'm sure is coming to people's minds is, well, why do you think Steven Anderson would do all this? Why would he go to all this? What is his goal? And I'll tell you what I think. Ultimately, I think it's because of pride. Pride made him do this. Let's see some telling words out of the man's own mouth.
Do you like the power of being a pastor?
I definitely like the power to influence masses of people. Absolutely. I like the power to be able to speak and thousands of people hear me within 24 hours. So yeah, I do like that. Because I want to, I want to do something big with my life.
Steve is a proud man who is all about doing something big with his life. I want to do something big with my life. I like the power of influencing many people. Where's the glory to God? Where's, yeah, he'll pay lip service, that he wants to give God glory. But that clip shows you very clear that, no, he wants to do something big with his life. I believe he's a saved man of God, but he's a proud saved man of God. His success has gone to his head just like Saul. And so I can also, it just comes down to he felt threatened by Tyler Baker because, people were leaving his church to join Valiant. And he didn't like that. I can also tell you the story I heard about a conversation between Brother Baker and Steven Anderson, where Steven Anderson even asked him, was like, hey, why are all these people, what's up? Why are all these people leaving to move to join Valiant? And, Brother Baker made a joking comment saying, well, I don't know. Maybe they like my preaching better. And it was a joke. He made it very clear that they laughed about it when he made the comment. But I personally think that probably bugged Steven Anderson. And it bugged him that people were leaving. And, so ultimately I think his pride led him he had to find a reason to make Tyler his enemy. And he did this by changing what he believes about the Godhead. Again, if you don't realize that he changed what he believed about the Godhead, then you're just blind. And he used to believe what the Bible clearly teaches. That's just I just can't really, I don't know, if you're not willing to see it, then you're not going to see it, but it's so obvious that he used to believe what the Bible believes, what we believe, or similar to what we believe. And, ultimately he used that to declare another saved or other saved Christians. He used that to declare them reprobate because, well, we know you're not supposed to hate a brother in Christ, so, well, I just, convince everybody that you're a reprobate, and, well, do not hate them, O Lord, that hate thee, and, all bets are off at that point. And in conclusion, I just have to say that I believe judgment is coming to Faithful Word and to this new IFB movement because of the pride that they have and because of their change on this particular doctrine. It's their doctrine has gone way off into the deep end of just being polytheistic. Yeah, you can say it's not polytheism, but it looks like polytheism. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, as once wise man used to often say. But judgment is ultimately coming, and I just want to point out this particular verse where it talks about things that God hates in Proverbs chapter 6. And Steven Anderson, this verse describes him almost completely. There's only one point that really doesn't match him, but let me read it through. Let's read Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 17. It says, verse 16. These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, and heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. So let me just go through these real quick. A proud look. Steven Anderson's proud. He's got proud looks. Anybody who's met the guy and who has an objective perspective on him will see he's a proud man. A lying tongue. I think I've made that clear. Steven Anderson is a liar. You know, his hands that shed innocent blood. I mean, okay, yeah, Steven Anderson hasn't murdered anyone necessarily, but he is that false accuser that accuses people of doing things that if we were under Old Testament law, they would be put to death. Because he has accused us, you know, or at least the brethren, of believing, you know, in a false God and preaching another God, you know, which according to the Old Testament is something you're supposed to be put to death for. So that he, without actually doing it, his hands are, you know, hands that shed innocent blood. And he has a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations. I mean, that defines, you know, most of his followers as well. People that take a little bit of information and just run with it and just imagine all these things, you know, the worst possible things. And once you declare somebody a reprobate, well, it's safe to assume the worst because they're filled with all unrighteousness. And so what else does it say? It says, feet that be swift in running to mischief. I mean, Steven Anderson is swift to run to mischief. I mean, he does. Just look at how quickly he reacts to things. He's a very reactive man, and he just wants to do nothing but start strife, you know. And he's a false witness that speaketh lies. I mean, it's redundant. Yeah, he's a false witness. He speaks lies, and he just tells more and more lies, you know. And he soweth discord among brethren. That's what he's done. He soweth discord among brethren. And, you know, he's done that with his lies. You know, and I heard a once wise preacher who used to say, you know, when our lips purpose to deceive, now it goes, oh, what a tangled web we weave when our lips purpose to deceive. And it's just a fact. I mean, his lies, he just has to tell more and more lies. And for this reason, I believe judgment is coming. It doesn't matter all the great works that they're doing. God can't overlook these types of transgressions. Judgment is coming, and, you know, I would be afraid to be a faithful word right now. It doesn't matter how good a works you're doing to support a man like that and to join in his evil. God can't overlook that. And, you know, I have something else for all the followers, you know, the Andersonites as they become called. You know, just think about this verse, because this is what a lot of Andersonites are guilty of. They don't look into things for themselves. They do what God commanded them not to do. Exodus chapter 23 verse 2 says, thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil, neither shalt thou speak in a cause to decline after many to wrest judgment. You know, you got these hordes of people. You know, it's the whole adage, you know, jumping on the bandwagon. You've got these hordes of people that are just like, well, he's a man of God who did great works, who does great works, so everything he does is right, so I'm just going to follow him. Be warned, you Andersonite, that judgment's coming upon you as well if you don't just wake up and think for yourself. Study to show thyself approved unto God. Don't just, you know, go with the flow and just because somebody sounds convincing, believe what they say. No, be like those of the church of Berea who are more noble than those of Thessalonica, for they search the scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this is a blessing to you. And, you know, let the chips fall where they may. I don't really care what people think. And, you know, this is my story of why I left Faithful Word Baptist Church. God bless and have a great day.